Hello and welcome to this facilitator training. In this video, we'll be going over the basics of facilitation, roles and responsibilities of a facilitator, and qualities that make a good facilitator. So what is facilitation? Facilitation is defined as the act of engaging participants in creating, discovering, and applying learning insights. Typically, this takes place during group meetings or discussions. The facilitator acts as a guide for meeting participants. They might provide topic prompts, ask clarifying questions, moderate discussions, support brainstorming, and they may even be responsible for designing the flow of the meeting. Now, a facilitator can be a team member who is working on a project, who is engaging in the meeting as another team member, and will be doing the work that comes out of the meeting. Or the facilitator can be a neutral third-party person who is only there to facilitate discussion and the meeting. If you are that third-party person who's not part of the team, you're not meant to come up with solutions, but to help the group problem solve and brainstorm their own solutions. Hopefully, after watching this video, you can see the benefits of having an outside facilitator come and really dedicate their time to developing an engaging and an efficient meeting structure. So any good facilitator knows that there is some prep work to do before every meeting. One of the basic things that you should be doing as a facilitator is creating an agenda. Now, there is a resource in our Notion page that goes through this in more detail. So this is going to be more of an overview or a general agenda creation. And the things that you want to do before you create an agenda is to identify the objectives of the meeting. Every meeting has a purpose or a reason why people are getting together, and you need to identify exactly what it is that the group wants to get out of this meeting so that you can make sure that you allot enough time for each of the tasks that are needed to get there. Now, if you are an outside person who is facilitating, you likely do not have all the information needed to develop the agenda, so it's really critical that you ask for input from the team members to make sure that you are discussing each and every topic that is of importance to them. This could even be the case if you are a team member yourself. It's always good to make sure that you're checking in with other team members to make sure that you're not missing anything and that you're addressing everything that needs to be addressed in the meeting agenda. Once you have these tasks identified, you can plan the timeline of the meeting. And this is really important because you want to make sure that when you're creating your agenda, you use the time allotted for the meeting to its fullest. You want to make sure that everything gets addressed, but you also don't want to overstuff your agenda and end up running out of time to address everything that needs to be done. Meetings always have a certain start and end time, and people's time are valuable. So it's really important to think about what can be done outside of the meeting to ensure that only the stuff that needs to be done when people are together and working synchronously is addressed during the meeting. This can save a lot of time and prevent frustration or stalling or not getting through everything that needs to be done. So it's important to also include prep work for team members. What do they need to know before they enter the meeting? Do they have to have any background information? Do they have to do anything beforehand to make sure that when they show up, they are showing up fully present and able to engage in the meeting? And then finally, you also want to include logistics like location or the meeting link if you're meeting virtually, the time that it starts and ends, or in the duration of the meeting so that people make sure that they can arrive on time and stay for the entire meeting, and any other logistics that are needed to make sure that people are able to get there and be fully present. Now, typically when you're sending out an agenda, you would like to send it out at least 24 hours in advance so that everyone has time to review it and they can go into the meeting knowing what to expect. However, you might want to send it out with more advance notice if there is a lot of prep work that you're sending out for the first time or that you want to make sure people are able to get through. And depending on your typical attendance to meetings, you may want to send out a day of reminder for people to attend. So, this can be particularly helpful if you're working with volunteers or community members that have a lot of conflicting priorities. This is just a good thing to remind them of to make it more likely that they will attend. And here is an example agenda that I sent out to our Copper Corridor collab. As you can see, I bolded the date and time so that I made that really clear and easy to find. I also included the Zoom link for the meeting. I gave a general overview and the objectives of the meeting. I listed all of the different topics that we would be discussing during the meeting, and I even included some times, some durations for each topic so that I know that we have enough time to address everything on this list, but also to let the attendees know and the participants know roughly how much time they can expect to speak on certain topics. This can make it a lot easier to ensure that you're moving from topic to topic because everybody knows that roughly how much time was allotted for it and what they when they need to move on to the next topic to ensure we cover the whole agenda. And then finally, I made it really clear and bolded the instruction to download the attachment to this email and fill it out before our meeting next week. Now, the facilitator during the meeting has a couple of things that they want to keep in mind. Typically, you want to make sure that you're there early, that you're ready and available to greet everyone as they enter. You want to be able to set a really positive and collaborative environment, one that's open, that's very open, and that is trusting, and people feel good about joining so that they are really working at their optimal conditions. Some other things to keep in mind when you're starting a meeting is that you might want to go over some ground rules and expectations. These can include things like make sure that you're limiting your or you're not multitasking or limiting your multitasking. So set your emails on silent. Make sure that you let everyone speak and try not to interrupt. You can use things like the hand raising icon if you're meeting virtually, or actually raise your hand physically if you're meeting in person when you want to let the facilitator know that you want to speak so that you're not interrupting people. Things like that are really helpful to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that we all have similar expectations of ourselves and each other, and it can make the meeting go a lot more smoothly. You can go over this before each meeting, or you can create these at the beginning of the working relationship and just have them readily available so that everybody can read them or see them for each subsequent meeting. We go into more details on setting ground rules and expectations in resources in our Notion page. This is also a great time to either review the agenda verbally and talk through it, or you can post it somewhere where the participants are able to read it throughout the meeting so that they know what to expect is coming next and to follow that timeline that you set up. You want to make sure that you are identifying any time limits or critical tasks. Maybe there's somebody who has to leave early, so you have to get through a certain agenda item within a certain time period, or you need to make sure that this specific task is completed before anybody leaves. Those are really important to make everybody aware of so that you can make sure that you're focusing on it and getting that done right away and you are making the most of the meeting time. You might also want to talk about cues for limiting time and moving on to the next topic. This can make it a lot easier for people to accept if they need to be interrupted or cut off, or if they want to continue talking about a topic, but they can understand then that there's just not enough time to do that in this meeting. And there's, again, more strategies for this on our Notion page. But some cues for limiting time might be that the facilitator will make a certain hand gesture or say something when it is time to move on to the next item. You might use timers. You might also have another group member or team member be a timekeeper who is responsible for letting people know when to move on to the next topic. And it's always important that if somebody does still have something to say, that you give them an opportunity to finish what they're saying either asynchronously after the meeting or potentially set up an additional time outside of the meeting to discuss it with the people who are relevant. so that if you do have to move on, you're not just cutting somebody off and not allowing them to finish what they need to say. You also want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak. This is going back to creating that collaborative environment that ensures that everybody feels safe sharing their thoughts and opinions, and making sure that everybody's included in decision making. This will make for a really engaging working atmosphere and will make sure that everybody can work to their best abilities. So a very common way to ensure that people get equal speaking chances and that one person or a couple of people don't dominate the conversation is the use of rounds. And that just means that as you're going through a topic, each person has the opportunity to speak. And that might look like the facilitator calling on each person to give their input to a topic, or the facilitator can identify the first person, and then when each person is done saying their piece, they can pass it on to the next person in the group. And this is a really great way to make sure that even the most shy or the person who may not typically speak up or raise their hand in a meeting still gets to talk. Shared decision making is also really critical during meetings to make sure that everybody has a say. This will prevent teams from making decisions that not everybody agrees to and not everybody is feeling good about. It makes sure that the team is considering all perspectives when making a decision. And there are some more resources on shared decision making in our Notions page, but two of the types of shared decision making models that you could use are agreeing by consensus, where everyone has to agree on a decision. And if anybody has any concerns or is not feeling fully in agreement with the decision that is being made, the group then works to rectify those issues and then represents it for another vote until everybody agrees. So you don't move on to actually doing the task until everyone has agreed to move forward with that decision. Another one that can take less time is consent-based decision-making, and this is just where no one actively objects. So maybe not everyone is in full agreement with the decision, they don't love the decision, but nobody's going to be standing in the way of moving forward with it. And again, you just want to make sure that you're giving everyone the opportunity to share any objections they have, and the group then would have to address those objections before moving forward. Now, as a facilitator, there might be some times where you might have a participant who engages in disruptive behavior. And disruptive behavior is just anything that gets in the way of the group working effectively and efficiently. It can be anything from somebody who is talking for too long to someone who is argumentative or somebody who is trying to undermine another team member and what they're doing. Anything that gets in the way of true collaboration and moving forward with the purpose of the meeting. There are plenty of different ways that you can engage with this person. It is always best to address it as soon as possible, as soon as it starts to arise, instead of ignoring it, because it won't go away. It'll more than likely only get worse. And there are some more resources on our Notion page that go over this. However, one of the strategies that you can use is to think of it as providing somebody three strikes. So, three strikes would involve you providing a gentle reminder or maybe an indirect prompt towards the ground rules and expectations that you've laid down. If somebody is perhaps talking too long or saying something that is inappropriate or cross-talking, so they're talking when other team members are talking, maybe you address the entire group and remind them of the ground rules. So you're not directly calling that person out, but you are making it clear that that behavior is not appropriate. If the behavior continues, then you want to consider directly addressing that person. Now, when you do this, it's always best to do it in private. So during a break during the meeting, if you can wait until after the meeting to address it, that always tends to go over better and is less likely to put the person on the defense. However, sometimes that's not an option and you have to address it in the moment. If you do directly address disruptive behavior, make sure that you remain respectful, that you address the behavior and not the person. So you are using descriptors about the behavior, and you're not saying that the person is disruptive, that they are a problem. It's that the behavior is the problem. But you also want to make sure that you are assertive and that you maintain control of the meeting so that the person does not get argumentative and that you can continue on with a productive meeting still, even though you're directly addressing them. And then finally, if the behavior still continues and the person is really derailing the meeting, if they become argumentative with the facilitator after being directly addressed, then you might want to consider removing them from the meeting, either briefly for a period of time or until the end of the meeting when you can address it more directly and potentially have other team members support this discussion. Hopefully, this does not happen very much. A lot of times, disruptive behavior is proactively addressed by setting those ground rules and expectations, by making sure that you are engaging in really good facilitator behavior, by actively listening and making sure that you're staying on time with the agenda, that you're hearing everybody out. Those things can typically rectify any problems that might arise because everybody's on the same page. It's important to remember that we always want to assume that everybody who's showing up to the meeting has best intentions, that they want to do the work, that they want what's best for the group. And if they do engage in disruptive behavior, that it's in a response to something that they are maybe misunderstanding or they're not in agreement with. So if we work on things proactively to make it the best environment possible for working, then we likely will not have the problems that we could have. So another important part of meetings is brainstorming. This can be brainstorming new ideas for projects, brainstorming problems or problem solving, and brainstorming can take up a lot of time in a meeting if you let it. It's very possible to only talk about one or two ideas for the entire meeting time. So it's really important for the facilitator to make sure that all ideas are heard, that we consider a wide range of ideas from everyone, but that we do it in a way that is quick and efficient. There are more strategies in our Notion page, but one of the popular ways to do quick brainstorming techniques is to use sticky notes. And you can either do this in person with actual sticky notes or use an app like Google Jamboard or Miro that has this option for people to use virtually. And what you would do is you would ask the participants to write down their thoughts and set a time limit of 5 to 10 minutes. Ask them to write down all thoughts that they have, and the goal is to produce as many ideas as possible. And then you want to then you want to vote on them afterwards. So after that time limit of brainstorming is over, then everybody will share their sticky notes either up on a whiteboard or present it to the group in Miro or in Google Jamboard where everyone can read it. And you set a time limit of 5 to 10 minutes where all of the team members will read all of the ideas and then they will vote on them. And they can typically a good way to vote on them is to just make a dot on the sticky note or add a sticker to the sticky note to indicate which topics they want to continue discussing. This ensures that all ideas are heard, that nothing is cut off before somebody is able to make a decision. So a lot of times it might be dependent on the person who is raising the idea that if whether or not that idea happens. This also makes sure that nobody's idea is shut down before they are heard completely with their idea. So once you have identified which ideas have the most votes, then you would spend the rest of the meeting time discussing those ideas in more depth. And this can mean that you go through a number of ideas in as short as 15 minutes, when something like that could take hours if every person presented an idea individually. Now, once the meeting is over, that doesn't mean that your role as a facilitator is done. You also want to make sure that you're sending out meeting minutes, and meeting minutes are a summary of the most important things that were discussed during the meeting. One way that you can do this is by using the agenda and taking notes in each section of the agenda to write down any decisions that were made, tasks that were assigned to someone with due dates, important details that were raised, resources that were shared. We want to make sure that we're capturing all of this either during the meeting in real time with a note taker, which might be the facilitator. It is typically really helpful that the facilitator is not taking notes during the meeting because it's important that they're listening and guiding the conversation. Something that can make that very useful is recording the meeting so that the facilitator can then go back and take notes based on the recording. Once you have these meeting minutes and you organize them and you make it succinct enough but detailed enough to be sent out to everyone, you can then send it out with links to the recording as well as any resources that are shared. The purpose of the meeting minutes is to memorialize anything that happened in the meeting and to also make sure that anybody who missed the meeting is able to stay up to date on all of the information that is happening. And typically you would want to send these out same day or within a couple of days of the meeting. You might also want to, after the meeting, ask for feedback from participants. It's really important that as a facilitator and as somebody who is leading the meetings, that you are asking for feedback so that you are making sure that you are meeting all of the participants' needs. Sometimes participants might have feedback around the structure of the meeting. Maybe they feel like it is too structured, especially if you're including time-boxed items and that it's too rigid. They want more of a free flow meeting. Sometimes they want more structure because they aren't able to get through everything that they need to get through. It's important to be eliciting this feedback frequently and often so that you are adjusting your behavior to what the group needs to be as efficient and effective as possible. And you also might want to follow up with future meeting times. As a facilitator, you want to make sure that you are always aware of meetings that are happening. If it was decided that a follow-up meeting needs to be scheduled, then you would follow up with the group to make sure that that meeting is scheduled. If this meeting is recurring on a weekly basis, then you might not have to do that. All you might have to do is just remind everybody that you're meeting again in 1 to 2 weeks. But you might actually have to send out something like a poll to find out when everybody is available for the next follow-up meeting if it's not on a recurring basis. And here's another example of meeting minutes that I sent out to the Copper Corridor Collab. As you can see, I linked the recording here. I also organized the minutes based on items that came from the agenda. So we had a section where we talked about organizational updates, calendar updates, and then next projects that we were going to identify. I linked all of the resources that were discussed during the meeting or that were shared in our meeting chat because we met virtually. And I even bolded one of the items that I wanted a specific team member to take a look at. So that's also something that you might want to do is make sure that you make it really clear if there are follow-up items, who's responsible for those follow-up items and what you want them to do and when you want them to complete it by. And finally, here are some qualities of a good facilitator. Facilitation is not for everyone, so it is important to keep in mind that if you want to facilitate, these are some qualities that you should have or that you are working on to improve for yourself. A good facilitator is organized, so you want to send out the agenda and meeting minutes on time. You want to stick with the group agenda and follow through on the tasks that were identified. You want to make sure that if you say you're going to do something, that you follow up and you actually do it. If you promise that you're going to send resources or send something to a team member, you need to make sure that you follow through. So it's really important for a facilitator to make sure that they themselves are organized, so that they can in turn keep the group organized. You also want to be a good listener. I mentioned that you, as the facilitator, you might not want to be the person who is also taking notes during the meeting, because it's really important to be an active listener. So you're responding to the things that people are saying, you're helping to guide the topics along, so that all team members are able to give their input, that you're able to get as deep as you need to go to solve the problems that you're discussing, or to complete the tasks that you need to complete. And then you also want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on whether or not everyone is engaged, if there seems to be any problems that are popping up. If you are an active listener and you're really connecting with your team members, then you should be able to identify where there might be some issues that are coming up. You also want to be aware of asking follow-up questions if clarifications from a participant is needed. It's very likely that if you as a if you as a facilitator don't understand what is being presented, that other participants are also not sure what is being presented. And a facilitator is the perfect role to make sure that you're asking those questions, that you're making sure everybody understands what's happening. It's also really important as a facilitator to accept feedback. I mentioned in the previous slide that you want to be asking for feedback from participants frequently and often. And this is really critical to make sure that you are providing the group everything that they need. Everybody has their own way of doing things, and the same is true for groups, the same is true for facilitators. But as a facilitator, you do need to be flexible and shift your way of working to what the group needs. So it's important to accept feedback, not take it personally, and adjust your approach when needed. It's really important to be empathetic as well. As I mentioned, along with being a good listener, if you are empathetic and you are connecting with your team members and the participants, then you are able to find those things that might be problems in the future if you don't address them. So you want to check in with the participants to make sure that they're understanding, that they're engaged, and if they're not, what can you do to help? And finally, you want to make sure that you're energetic and motivating. Plenty of people don't enjoy sitting in meetings, and they might lose interest or motivation to remain fully engaged. So, as a facilitator, it's your responsibility to keep it fun, keep it fast paced, keep it enjoyable, but also making sure that it is an effective meeting. So having this energetic and motivating personality or air about you is a great way to keep everybody following along and engaged. And that's it for this presentation. Now, I do want to share briefly our Notion page. This is the Notion page for the Copper Corridor Collab, and this is the training page. At this time, there's only facilitator training materials. So you can see here is this recording here. There's also the facilitator training slide deck and resources on agenda creation, setting ground rules, staying on time during meetings, sharing the speaking space and making sure everyone is heard, group brainstorming, shared decision making, dealing with disruptive behavior, and finally writing meeting minutes. So if you open these up, you'll be able to see the step-by-step instructions on how to do these different things. And over here on the left, you can also navigate in between all of our other groups. So this is our training page, but we also have a regional economy working group, a land use working group, arts and culture working group, and self-sufficiency working group, as well as our general group here. And each page has all of the resources needed for the team members. So this page, for example, has our meeting summaries and meeting recordings and all of our strategic planning documents for creating causal loop diagrams for the copper corridor. And then we also have our meeting calendar. Something like this is a really helpful tool for a facilitator to keep organized and make sure that you are sharing all of the relevant information with your team. So I highly recommend that you look into this. It is free and you're able to share it with your entire team. So this is just a great resource. Thank you and have a great day.